How's it going, everybody? Today we are going to talk about refeeds, more specifically in the context of contest prep, but I think this applies to anyone who's also doing a cutting phase or a dieting phase that is kind of trying to understand when they're going to need to kind of pull back and give themselves a little bit more food. So let's get into it. What is a refeed? To begin, a refeed is a I wouldn't say slow, a temporary is a better word for it, bump in calories where you're going to be eating usually above your maintenance calories. So typically when we're in a cutting phase, we're going to be pulling down below our maintenance. We're going to be in a deficit, right? A refeed allows us to come back into a surplus. And the point of this is if you want to have your metabolism go back up, because as we are pulling food down, our metabolism is going to start fighting us, right? When you pull food lower, your maintenance calories is going to go down because your body is trying to survive. If you're eating less food, our body's going to find ways to preserve food, right? So to counteract this, to increase metabolism, one of the things we do is give ourselves more food. We're going to put ourselves in a surplus so our body stops saying, hey, we need to lower our maintenance calories to put us in a more substantial survival state. It gets us our bodies out of that kind of evolutionary mechanism. So when it comes to bodybuilding as well, we're typically going to give our athletes more carbohydrates. If they're female or natural, you may give them more fats to help with hormone production. But typically for enhanced bodybuilders, it's going to be a pretty high increase in carbohydrates because we're trying to increase glycogen. When you're in a dieting phase and you're cutting, you're going to be depleted. You're going to be low on muscle glycogen, which is important for fullness when it comes to being on stage as well as performance in the gym. So that's kind of why we focus on carbohydrates. So I kind of talked about this a lot already, but why do they matter, right? So the main point I already touched on was the whole metabolic side of things. Like when we have we're going to be in a low metabolic state as we go throughout our cut, but also there's other things that are going to be affected, such as our hormone production, kind of what I touched on why you might want to increase fats, because the lower your fats go, the lower your hormone production is going to be. Everything is dictated by cholesterol. You'll also want to improve gym performance. When you see gym performance start to fall off significantly, this could be a sign that you need to have a refeed. We don't want your workouts to tank so hard that you're having big strength drop-offs. You're not making any progressions in the gym. And that's a sign that we're kind of digging too hard, and we may even be losing muscle if we're really noticing drop-offs in set stamina, strength, any of those gym performance indicators. The other thing is cognition. So when you're dieting hard, you're going to have less energy to function neurologically. And one of the things that's nice is to get a break from that. Like the longer you go and push through a deficit, push through the cognitive fatigue, the more it's going to build up, the more your personal life, your professional life may take a hit. And we want to kind of control that as much as possible, especially when we have the option to. And this comes back to timing your cut so that you're not trying to do such an aggressive approach where you can allow yourself to have refeeds. You have a timeline where you've kind of accounted for periods where you're not just dropping, where you can kind of give yourself these breaks, maintain muscularity throughout the whole cutting process, and bring your best look in when you are wanting to peak or when you want to be finished with your cut. The other thing I want to say is refeeds can typically be more than 1 or 2 days. If you're really trying to get someone out of metabolic hole, like their metabolism's really tanked, it usually takes at least 2 or 3 days of refeeding to get them back to a state where they're going to be losing weight again from the calories that they were on. We're also going to see effects from a neurological perspective, of hunger and appetite, right? So ghrelin is your hunger hormone, leptin is your satiated hormone, and we kind of want those to be balanced when we have a refeed, because when we're cutting, we're going to have really high ghrelin, we're going to be really hungry, and we're going to have really low leptin, because our body's going to tell us, you're not satiated, you need to eat because you're in a survival state. So controlling those hormones, those neurotransmitters is going to be important for having a successful cut and having a successful prep. And just so athletes aren't just hating their lives, they're enjoying the process. And it all comes back to doing this on a proper timeline so you can throw these things down it rather than just having to cut hard every single day for their entire 12, 16-week prep. And I kind of talked about this already. When we give refeeds, we're not usually going to be using dirty foods. It can be used if someone's really struggling with cravings, especially like a lifestyle. They may prefer that so that they can kind of get those cravings out of the way. And a lot of times you give someone a burger and fries, you give someone donuts, like they get that craving out and then they feel significantly better cognitively. It affects ghrelin and leptin where neurologically they're not getting that hormone signaling as much. So sometimes dirty food can be the answer. And this is just something to play around with an athlete or with your own, if you're doing your own cut, this is something to kind of test and see what foods work best for you. But the reason we kind of lean for bodybuilding on the safe side, using a high amount of carbohydrates, clean fat sources, is because we don't want any GI issues. When you start to have GI issues, you run into potentially days of problems, and that's something we don't want, especially when we're trying to peak for a show. The last thing you want is any waist issues, any GI stress, any gut extension. Like, it's all things you want to be mindful of. You also, when it comes to competing, want to use foods that you would typically deploy in your peak week. You are going to usually mimic the look of what you liked from a refeed in your peak week to get that full muscle exploding look. So play around with foods and also monitor your weight. So if you notice you look really good with certain foods at a certain weight after you've done a refeed, it's pretty good idea. It's a pretty good idea that you're going to be able to replicate that in your peak week. Take notes of it. And if you looked really good then, why wouldn't you replicate it during your peak week to bring the best during show day? So use foods you know you're going to experiment with foods you know you're going to use on peak week, because that's how you're going to find the stage look that really matters. The last point is kind of looking for those signs that you might need a refeed, right? So we talked about the metabolic, like you're eating less and less food, but the scale isn't really moving. It's a sign that our metabolism is really fighting us heavily. You're having prolonged or consistent gym performance drop-offs. It's normal to see your first exercise, see a rep or two drop off here and there. Maybe your second or third set is a little bit less. You get a couple less reps than you did last week, but your strength is pretty much the same. That's a sign, that you're okay. But when you start to notice that really affecting your first lift, your second lift, your third lift, and big drop-offs in reps and weight, then this is probably a sign that you're pretty depleted and you're losing muscle. Sleep is another one that you are feeling like you can't stay asleep. You're hardly sleeping. You're waking up constantly throughout the night. This is a sign that the body is very depleted. It's kind of fighting for you to get more food in. So monitoring that with these other signs can be something to kind of tell yourself, I may need a refeed. And now with lethargy, there's minor lethargy and there's heavy lethargy. There's minor where it's like, yeah, it takes a little bit of effort to like get up and move because you're not eating as much food, you don't have as much energy. But when you start to notice it's a drag to do anything, getting up the couch once is the hardest thing. Getting out of bed in the morning is the hardest thing. You're not able to get work done. You can't focus because you're just so brain dead. These are also signs that you may need a refeed, and then a lack of response to stimulant usage. So if you're using a lot of caffeine and you're just super lethargic still, you're not getting that effect, you drink a cup of coffee or an energy drink and you feel like it's doing absolutely nothing, this could be your body telling you that, hey, we need a break from this dieting phase. And I kind of touched on the ones below here where these are all signs that hunger, stress, small gym performance drops, irritability, flat and depleted, these are signs that you're cutting. They're not signs that you need a refeed. And that's why I've tried to kind of describe the differences here. So if you're someone that's trying to do this yourself, or if you're a coach that's learning, you can kind of understand the differences here. So that's the basics of a refeed. Kind of went over the differences between natural and enhanced. If anyone has any questions about that, please feel free to comment, and I can make more content on that. But overall, I think this is a pretty comprehensive guide of how to refeed, the signs you may need one, what's happening in the body that's telling you you're hungry versus you're actually depleted. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. Let me know your thoughts, share, comment, like the video, and yeah, thank you guys for your support.